Welcome to Gaming Gaiden, everybody. This is the podcast that uncovers the side stories of the gaming world, as well as the world of Japanese to English localization, especially in the world of video games, of course. I'm Andrew, and with me here is...
Mike, that's me.
And we got Matt Katch with us today. And,
yeah, so let's talk a little bit here.
Sorry,
Matt, thank you so much for coming on to chat with us today about translation and all.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate that. Let folks at home know, Matt has translated quite a few games. Some of the ones we can talk about are Romancing Saga 3, Captain Tsubasa Rise of New Heroes, Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation Code Fairy, Final Fantasy Dimensions 2, Phantasy Star Online 2, one that has a special place in the hearts of this podcast, Summer of Memories, and Senko no Ronde 2, which also was a good memory of mine. Well, the oldest one from like 2006 or so, I think it was. But yeah, that's a nice little resume, and he's got some other stuff he's working on that he can't talk about, and we don't even know about it, so it should be cool.
And cool name, by the way. It's like you're an anime character or something. Matt Katch, like Ash Ketchum or something. That's what I was thinking. So, yeah.
My name in Pokemon Go does reflect that.
Oh, really? Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah. So, let's start from the beginning. Actually, Mike, I think you have these questions. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Sure. No, so what was it that got you into Japan in the first place? Japanese culture, Japanese language. What was the beginning for you?
So initially, when I came to Japan, I'm gonna try to adjust my couch so I'm not just leaning into the camera here. Initially, I came to Japan in 2009, which you may recall at that time the world economy wasn't doing so great. And it was right after I graduated college. So I graduated in May of that year, and I came to Japan in July. And I was pretty much just looking for a job. So I started out at doing the English teaching racket, as a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And after 5 years of that, I had learned the language and become a little bit more familiar with how to talk to people and all that. And I made the jump from teaching to translation because I decided I wanted to stay, but I wasn't so sure that English education or ESL was how I wanted to remain in Japan.
Yeah, that's fair. A lot of folks make that change. You know, I started as an educator there on the JET program, went back to America, taught for a while, went back to Japan, taught for a while longer, went back to America, went back and forth. But for me, education was the thing, but not for Andrew.
No, not for me. Mike and I met as ALTs in Saitama, probably in 2006. And yeah, I did it for 3 years. I lived in Japan from 06 to 09, probably 3 years, 3 months, I think was my total. Loved it. Loved that I did it. Visited twice before then, but like after 3 years, just kind of felt like it was enough, I guess. And I've been back several times since then as well. But anyway, but you went to Japan. You went to Japan to get a job in Japan. But did you grow up liking anime and manga, video games?
Yeah, how do you leave college and go right to Japan? Like, what made you decide?
So I mean, it's kind of an odd place to look for your first job.
Yeah, it was my first job too, out of college.
Same here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, everybody.
And it's kind of funny that you left right about the time I got here. Actually, then if you were 06 to 09.
I came back to America the weekend Avatar came out, which was December something 09.
Okay, and I got here right at the end of July of 09.
Oh, so we have some crossover.
We had a little overlap. Unfortunately, I'm at the wrong end of the country. I'm down in Shikoku, so.
Okay. But
not
that might be the right games mainly, and growing up in the 90s, or.
So I did martial arts. There was that. And yeah, I like as a kid. I was an only child, and my mom would sometimes do part-time work at her friend's store is one of the things I remember. And we had a TV hooked up in the back of the store, but it was the old school you have 4 channels situation.
Okay.
But one of the cartoons they did carry on the weekends was the cartoon block that was Dragon Ball, Gatchaman, Sailor Moon, and I don't know what the 4th one was. I think there was a 4th cartoon. But it was like that was like it for like.
Was that the 4 kids thing? Is that what it was called? Was that 4 kids? I don't remember.
I don't remember what that block was actually called. I just know that if I didn't tune in on time for that, the only other thing that was on was pretty much the 700 Club, and not a huge fan of that show.
What state are you from? May I inquire?
So I'm originally from Illinois. A lot of my family is from Wisconsin, so sometimes I like to pretend I'm from Wisconsin, but originally I'm from Illinois.
Okay, got it.
And then so I had that, and then through the 90s I was big SNES kid. Like that was kind of my I played Nintendo and I've played Atari when I had babysitters or I was at somebody else's house, but SNES was my first system. And I think my gaming kind of peaked with that because my taste in games is pretty much almost relegated to arcade games and console games that came out during that period.
Oh, you're gonna get along with us then.
You're in good company.
I watched the Superman episode of your other podcast, which was really fascinating, and I was like, oh, I wanna argue with Mike, but at the same time, he's exactly spot on with how I feel about most of these games.
Oh yeah. Now, Mike and I rarely disagree with games. I mean, sometimes, but we're pretty much. Yeah,
I knew that like when you invited me to come on, I was like, oh okay. When I saw that, I'll be able to talk to these guys. No, they know how I feel.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'm glad you checked that out. That's nice.
Andrew was nice enough to pass that along to me and tell me about, Yeah. He was like, hey, check this out. I talked to some cool people.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a little tough in our first season just because people are like, what's Gaming Gaiden? I don't see it online. Like as of this recording, it's not released yet. We're releasing our first season after this is our first season, so we're still in the recording phase for it. But yeah, okay. So it was anime, and then SNES.
There's some anime, some martial arts, and then a lot of those early SNES games as well were kind of. I don't think I was wholly aware, but you play like Chrono Trigger and the early Final Fantasy games and. Some part of me put together, despite being a pretty dumb kid, put together that these things were coming out of Japan.
Especially anime. Like with video games, I don't think I knew at first until they said something in EGM magazine or something about it. But with anime, it's just so. I remember it being like immediately obvious that this is a Japanese product.
And I remember sort of the early. It wasn't Netflix, but it was something similar, like Redbox before it was Redbox, where we would order DVDs in the mail. And my dad would always make sure to include one DVD that was usually some kind of anime.
Nice.
That's nice of him. That's good.
That might have been Netflix because that's what Netflix was at first.
Yeah.
And he kind of turned a blind eye. I remember one night he came downstairs and me and my friends were all watching a movie down in the basement. It was the original Ninja Scroll movie.
Oh man.
And there's a big scene where a giant rock man tries to aggressively go after a girl and she poisons him to death. And he walked down right at the right scene. And he was just like, what are you guys watching?
Dude, that's
anime, Dad.
He was fine with it. He hung out and watched while we were watching. I'm like, well, I guess we don't tell Mom about this until I guess now, 20 years later. But
no one knew what anime was at the time too much because I had Ninja Scroll 2. I saw it like a lot of times, and my parents never thought anything of it because it was a cartoon. You know, no one really knew what anime was at the time, so it's just weird. Yeah.
Same with I think I would go to the local comic shop and try to find something that was manga as opposed to an American comic. I love American comics, but you know, I was a little kid and I was like, oh, I've seen some of the Japanese comic stuff, and they talk about speed lines. And I like to draw, and I was like, what can I find that's in that genre? And one of the only things they had was Ranma 1/2. And I remember I had like the first 2 volumes of that in English, and my dad picked up and was reading it one day, and I was like, the first couple of volumes, they show the gender change by just cutting her shirt open.
Whoa.
I was kind of like, he didn't say it. I think I was a little older at the time, but I was still kind of like 12 years old, you know, maybe 13. And, you know, none of it's sexual or anything, but
yeah,
you know how Americans feel about any kind of nudity or anything.
Yes, that's a problem with our culture, I think.
That sets off alarm bells that shouldn't necessarily be set off, especially not knowing, you know, what we know now of like Ranma half. It's like, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Kids content, right? But
don't worry about it.
Fortunately, my dad was like, yeah.
All right.
So you said that you were teaching for 5 years there, and then you were learning the language while you were teaching.
Yep.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about your language learning experience? You know, what was difficult for you? What were some of the troubles you had, or what were some of the successes or methods you used?
Sure. So I did start off my first 5 years were on the JET program. I think around the time I came was when they were starting to be very open to the idea to keeping teachers longer.
Yeah, because when I did it, it was only 3 years.
Like the 4th and 5th year were technically like, if they want to keep you. And my Board of Education response was, it's a lot cheaper. So they, I mean, I wasn't, it's not like I was a terrible teacher, but, and
you were middle school only, right? Did you do middle school only?
Middle school and elementary school.
Oh, okay. Like when I was there, it was just middle school, because if you did elementary, you had to make a lesson plan, and I wasn't signing up for that because I was not in Japan to teach. I mean, I was doing it as a job, but I just wasn't I don't know, man. It just wasn't my thing. I went to school for film and television, and then all of a sudden I had to make lesson plans. It was just not my thing.
Man. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
I developed that spidey sense for the concho, you know, just batting those little hands away. You're like, nah, man.
I never got really angry with any of the elementary school kids because they were too adorable. But a couple of times I would stop a kid and be like, you can't do that to a teacher. And by the time that concho became a routine issue, which was towards my 4th and 5th year, when I was started to be put into a lot of elementary schools. So I had encountered elementary school kids before, but it was like once or twice a week. And then by that point it was every afternoon.
Yeah.
And I would just tell those kids, hey, you can't, you know, like, it's fine. I love you, but you can't do this to me when I come over. Okay. And
so here's the translator's note. You can't stick your fingers in my butt.
Yeah, somebody
for those who don't know what a concho is.
I'm sure a lot of our audience will know, but yeah.
It's a playful.
Some will know the well, if anybody's seen, like Naruto has a joke about it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody that's seen the Naruto anime or read the comics knows that there's the
it's a ninja move. I think it's not even from Naruto originally.
It's a ninja attack.
Yeah, it's a ninja attack. Isn't that crazy? Oh man.
But I had to tell a few kids, like, you can't do that. Like, that's not okay. And to their credit, these were 5th and 6th grade kids who were like, okay, Mato sensei, like, okay, Matt, I won't do it again. And they were. I kind of miss it because they were just.
They were fun.
Like,
kids. They were fun.
Especially
Definitely.
compared to once they hit elementary school. Before the hormones kicked in, they were lovely children.
Yeah, one of my memories teaching was I only taught elementary maybe 1 or 2 days the whole 3 years I was there, but this one girl comes to get me from the teacher's room or whatever, like we're starting class now, or I don't know how it worked, but anyway, she
Yeah,
comes to
that's
get
cool.
me,
Yeah.
and she's got to be like 6 or 7. She says in English, hello, I am Reina. I am happy." and then, and then I had to that was her introduction, and then we had to walk to class. It was one of those movies. Like, have you ever seen Dana Carvey talk about that? He has a joke where his kid says, "Does God have feet?" And he's like, "Hold on, I got to sit down. It's too cute. I can't stand up right now." I kind of had to sit down after that part, after she said, "I am happy." So yeah.
That's too adorable.
Yeah.
Sorry to derail a little bit there, but it's a good thing for us to delve into that because we have that shared experience.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Back to your language journey.
Yeah, did you find? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No. Please.
Like, sorry to butt in here a little bit, Mike. Just what part did you find when you're studying Japanese? Well, actually, were you studying? How much did you know when you first came to Japan? When you first moved?
When I went to university, and this is kind of how I ended up teaching. I was a creative writing major.
Okay.
With minors in Japanese culture and philosophy.
Okay, Japanese philosophy or just philosophy?
So separate, 2 minors. I had a minor in philosophy and a minor in Japanese culture. And which, my Japanese culture minor was actually way more complex than my philosophy minor because it included linguistics and a lot of 400 level courses, or senior level courses that my philosophy minor did not. So I took the when I first went to university, you had to have 4 semesters of a foreign language to graduate. It was part of your required credits, and I tested out of that requirement with German.
Okay.
When I first got there, because I had taken my advanced German courses in high school, and I had spent some time in Germany.
Oh, that's cool.
And so it was great because actually one of the tests to test out of the language requirement was a test I had taken in my German class in high school. It was nice. These stories sound really familiar.
Oh, man.
Wow.
I think I remember these questions. But I was really big into Japanese culture because we had MIRC, like Merc. If you remember back in the day, the old school chat rooms.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'd log into IRC, and through people's personal servers, you could download files and stuff. And this was, I have a different feeling about, sharing raws and stuff of manga and stuff now. But at the time, I was like 13, 14. So I give myself a pass on semi-illegal activities at the time, but I download a lot of manga that way. So I did get really into manga and anime through my friends at the time and through online chat servers. And I was thinking, I don't have to take language stuff, but I have these open spaces in my schedule now, so why don't I just take another language? So I did take Japanese for 4 semesters. I was a terrible student. It was taught, and you'll both appreciate this, it was taught the way English is taught here in Japan.
Oh, wow.
So
you guys had an ALT program?
You can imagine how effective it was.
Yeah.
Nothing that my Japanese teachers, my educators were great, but they were both Japanese women, older Japanese women who had come here and gotten their PhDs. Very smart, very cool. And if you wanted to talk to them about linguistics or something, they were incredibly knowledgeable and great. But when it came to teaching college age American students Japanese language education like they were elementary school students, they did well. I still eventually got around to learning the language, but it
right.
was
Sounds like it was in spite of the program.
They had other higher level courses that were more, I would say they were probably more interested in, but also were just more worth their time, more worth their credentials than worrying about us. But at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like they were dismissive. We had great interactive classes. We had things, once a week where everybody get together and they'd kick on. I don't know if you've ever seen like an old school mochi maker machine, or it's like a rice. It's like a rice maker, but it's a rice maker constantly in an earthquake, and it just
oh wow.
And it makes mochi out of all of the rice.
I've never seen that actually.
No, that's cool, man.
So
it's
we
not a bunch of old guys pounding and yelling. And
you don't. Yeah, not the hammer. Not the like. If you've ever been to a Japanese wedding, the hammer.
Oh yeah.
But so I did study some Japanese in college, but by the time I got to Japan, I knew the kanji for 1 to 10 basically, and I knew
it.
And I knew I could conjugate verbs in a formal way. I could still do like mas, masen, that sort of thing. And I actually remember within my first couple of weeks here, because initially I lived out more in the countryside. I still kind of live in the countryside, but I lived really in the countryside then. An older gentleman who stopped me on the street and was like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I kind of did my basic self-introduction. And he explained to me, because this was late summer, early autumn, what the word sushi meant. And I distinctly remember like a 15-minute conversation where he's trying to teach me what, cool or refreshing means. And I just do not know the word. And, eventually I got it, but it was definitely something I probably should have known.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a really common one. I went to Japan with 3 words, and I learned sushi pretty quickly.
When did you come to Japan, Mike?
I first went to Japan in 2001. That's when I graduated from college, and I hopped right over there that summer on the JET program. But I only did 1 year because I don't know if you remember how quickly JET asks you if you're going to stay on. It was something like December of the year when I had gotten there in July, I think it was. And I had only planned to stay there for X amount of time. 9/11 happened. And I was like, I think I should go home,
Yeah.
And I did. And then I went back again later. And that's how I ended up overlapping with Andrew in 2005, 2006.
Okay. That's kind of cool.
No.
It's nice to feel like the young person in the room. Like there's like a lot of translators, we interact on Twitter. And there are a lot of translators in their early to late 20s.
Yeah, no, it's great to see that the younger generation. They've also got a lot of great resources. Thinking about my time.
Oh my God, that's a whole other topic. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm like in my mid 30s. I'll be 36 next month, and I'm just kind of like, oh, there are people older than me who exist in this arena and do work in this area. I'm just kind of like, oh, that's nice. It's just sometimes they make me feel a little bit past my prime.
I mean, Japanese is a real resource-rich language to learn. Somebody was saying like if you wanted to learn Vietnamese or something, it's like it's almost not even less than 20% of what Japanese has. So that's the good part about learning Japanese. But I mean, like Mike was there, of course, but like when I was studying Japanese from like 06 to 09, I didn't know much at all until I actually moved there. And I mean, of course, the internet existed, but there was, YouTube wasn't like it is now. There was no, YouTube started in 05 for one, and I was in Japan in 06. And just learning Japanese at that time was just a whole different deal. It was a lot more old school. Now, God, it's just so great with YouTube and everything.
I remember another when I did orientation Chicago, one of the guys who was telling us about his experiences in Japan was talking about living in the country, but he had been there earlier, probably around the time Mike originally came. I think around 2001, and he had stayed for 3 years, I think. And but internet on the countryside wasn't that widespread at that time.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So he went 3 years living in the countryside, you know, probably an hour train ride from any kind of city hub, and maybe not necessarily what we would consider a big city hub, with no internet.
Yeah.
And
That's so crazy.
I look back and I'm like, I might have gone insane.
Yeah. At least you could maybe talk to people at a bar. You learn Japanese faster in the countryside, I heard.
I've one of the things, well, I suppose I'm not remiss to admit it, but you know, I learned a lot of my Japanese hanging out with people my own age in drinking establishments, and with people triple my age.
Oh yeah,
in
definitely.
those establishments, because I remember
Japan is a drinking culture. It's certainly not remiss. It's very much engaging with the culture.
You're kind of like a puppy, where you have to socialize yourself so that you learn how to interact with others.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember like going out drinking with like school janitors, for example. And they were just the nicest people who would pick up your tab, and they would teach you the best Japanese.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, that's one of the fun things about learning a language is, like, especially if you're of age, is just going out and drinking with people. You get your study on that way.
Yeah, I know
the real study.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know for a lot of people, like, it comes down to like they want to read light novels, or they want to read manga, or they want to watch anime in Japanese, and or play games in, you know, the original language, and that's fine. That's great. I like doing that too, especially since I've learned Japanese. I don't turn subtitles on anymore. I just watch it. But you know, for me, a lot of it was because I was here, and I needed to socialize, and I wanted to talk to the people around me, and I wanted to talk to my, you know, I was in Jet, which if you've been in Jet in the countryside, as I think both of you have.
No, I was never Jet.
Oh no,
I was in
I'm sorry.
I was in a Jet-like program, probably very similar to Jet.
Yeah, and I ended up on that program because Jet didn't let you reapply once you were in and you had left. You'd never have the chance. And I know they eventually changed that. There was like a certain time period after which you could apply again. But yeah.
Well, anyway, it was largely just to socialize.
Yeah.
Like even
living life, man. Communicate.
Even like one of my closest friends, well, a number of my closest friends obviously are Japanese, but also like one of my close friends is Chinese, and we can't, but he speaks a little English. Like, we'll speak English to each other to a certain extent, but you know, if we have to discuss anything technical or complicated or complex, we'll just use Japanese because he studied here too. So yeah, it came out of a need to socialize. It was almost like I was really into video games, comics, and everything else, but when I got here, it became about socializing, and then I kind of backtracked into just reading tons and tons of comics and watching lots of anime after the fact.
Were you good at German as well? Did you feel
no.
like you had oh, really?
I am terrible at foreign languages, and and somewhere I think you interviewed a fellow I work with. You talked to Mel as well, correct?
Yes, we did.
Hello.
And Zach Davison.
So Zach I work with a little bit, but we mostly talk about comics in English.
Okay.
Like I was his editor for a little bit on one project, but Mel and I I'm his editor for a lot of projects we work together. I think.
Yeah, I noticed the overlap there of the banner of games you had. I was like, wait a second, this grouping of games looks familiar. And then I checked the Ace Translator.
Yeah. When we're asked for our resumes for projects, there's a lot of overlap. But he uses me mostly as an editor because of my creative writing background. But where's I going with this? What were we talking about?
Communication, having some drinks with the locals, learning languages.
German. Oh, were you good at German? You're bad at language.
Oh, okay. No, I was. and this long walk for a comment was just me saying somewhere in the future he is sitting and laughing because me saying I'm not good at languages, he's like, yep, he's terrible at 'em.
Oh no.
he is somewhere like I remember one of the first times we met. He walked in the room and he's like, oh, I knew where you were sitting somewhere in the restaurant because I could hear this American accent speaking Japanese.
Oh yeah. It's hard to take out your accent entirely, like 100%, unless you learned it before before you turned 12 or something.
We just like giving each other a hard time. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You work together long enough. I'm sure you and Mike have some of that dichotomy as well.
So
a little bit.
I'm a teacher still, right? That's my career. I've got a master's in teaching English just because of other languages and so on. I was an English lit major in college. What I want to say, and this is very important, I want everybody to know this. Don't worry about your accent.
Yeah.
Anybody who would ever complain about your accent is somebody you don't want to bother with anyhow. It is perfectly natural to not have a native accent when you are not speaking your native language. Please don't feel bad about it. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about it.
I agree. And I think when you see Japanese people really care about the English, their Japanese accent in English, it's like they really want to perfect that before going any further. It kind of feels like, and it's like, no, just keep going further. Don't worry about, like they call, when they're perfectionists. It's common. It's a stereotype, at least, for Japanese people to be kind of a perfectionist. But like you kind of can't be a perfectionist with this because more than likely it's not going to be perfect like ever. So I'm just agreeing with what Mike just said. Like, just keep going. Don't worry about the accent. Yes.
And it's cool. Like if somebody like Mel and Matt, they joke, we could joke around, you're a friend. It's cool. But like when it actually comes to the real situation of someone who would be like, I don't want to talk to this person because I can't deal with their accent.
It can sting a little. Yeah.
It might hurt you, but like you're better off without them.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things I tell a lot of people when they get here as well that, I even remember Japanese education amongst like ALTs being like a competition almost. Like who's studying kanji the hardest?
That was not my experience. I mean, Mike was studying, I was studying, but like, man, Mike, don't you feel like, I mean, I don't want to talk out of turn too much because they might hear this eventually, but there weren't too many people learning the language around us, man.
Nah, not at all.
Not too many.
No.
Actually, Mike, I remember you told me you were like glad that I wanted to learn because there was no one around you at the time that gave a shit.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
When my first year there, I didn't speak any Japanese going into it. My school didn't even offer it. So I had no experience whatsoever. A guy down the street who my grandfather ran into because he was a census taker said, like, oh, I'll teach you a couple of words. He was a Japanese guy. My grandfather was just like, oh, by any chance you Japanese? Yeah, you teach my grandson a little something. So he taught me domo, arigato, and konnichiwa. That's it. So that's what I went with. But when I went there, I had been studying Spanish for a while. So what ended up happening was I ended up using Spanish a lot because we were in Gumma and there were a lot of Brazilian folks there and they could understand my Spanish better than my Japanese. So between the Spanish that I had and what little Japanese I was developing, we could communicate. And that's how I got all around to the World Cup matches and stuff. Like not to go to the stadiums, but like to go chill out in someone's like barbecue or something. It was a good time. I remember leading a whole crew of Jets one night, speaking Spanish to the Brazilian guys, being like, "Oh, yeah, we're going this way. Don't worry, guys. We'll be at somebody's house there, and he's sending some guy in a car to come pick some of yous up too." It was just fun times.
That's really cool.
Was that was before me? That was your 2001.
Well, yeah, because the World Cup was hosted in 2002. So it was the Korea and Japan World Cup co-host session, and Brazil made it to the final that year against Germany.
I was in Germany during the I think it must have been the European Cup then. So I was in Germany during 2003, I
Oh,
think, which
wow.
would have been 2 years later. That was, yeah, like
Still a strong
Greg's
team.
used,
Was
Greg's
Khan the
used to
keeper
get
still?
Khan was the keeper. They had
Khan.
somewhere in my parents' house in America, there is a little keychain with like the little clip binder sort of thing, and it has a digitally like a 8-bit version of Khan's face on the strap, and says Oliver. From. Of course, we were all Germany fans that year because we were all in Germany. We weren't looking to start any trouble.
You're of German descent. You're of German descent.
I'm adopted.
Oh, okay. All right.
So my parents are German, Polish, and Norwegian descent.
Oh,
like
wow.
through their grandparents. It's hilarious with the my mother's side for the Norwegians because my uncle is big into family history, and he's traced it back. And there is somebody I have like a great grandfather Olaf. And I was like, there's an Olaf in there. I don't think he was a snowman, but you know.
I'm actually going to Norway in a couple weeks. So
that's so
yeah,
cool.
I know. Yeah, first time ever. Yeah.
Cool.
Moving
Maybe
on.
we should get back to some of our other subjects.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Don't apologize for anything. We're enjoying our conversations here, but I also want to make sure that we also address some of the key issues of gaming and translation.
Yeah,
very important.
There was a thing about that. Like,
that's why we're here.
Well, I know we were talking about learning Japanese, and for me, it was my free periods at work. When I first got here, I taught half the day, and I had half the day free. So I would just spend the second half of the day studying.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
I used, I don't know if you know the Heisig method or Heisig.
Yep. Remembering the kanji.
Yeah. You learn the radicals that make up the kanji, and then you invent stories for all the kanji. And I think it took me about a year and a half to get to where I knew all the Joyo kanji. And I could read them reliably well. I was still working on kunyomi, the Japanese readings, but
that was my issue with the Heisig method. I tried it, and I stopped somewhere at around 1,000, where I was like, I felt like I had nothing to attach them to when I was using the Heisig, so I dropped off it, and I went to
I learned via the
flashcards.
Is that
Tuttle's kanji cards? It's how I learned. I had a pad.
I had a friend who did White Rabbit Press White Rabbit the Tuttle cards, and he works in a factory on the other end of this prefecture right now. He was an English teacher. He was basically like a high level management for an English company. He was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. So now he works for a company, just has a normal company job here in Japan now, and that's how he learned kanji. Yeah,
that's cool.
He used Tuttle as well.
Dude, that's what I tell people. Like, everybody these days wants to get on an app or something, which I get, but I mean, look, if you learn it that way, that's great. But if they want to know how I learned it, it was like, you get the card, you look at it, you write it down like 5, 10, 1,000 times, and then you have your like got it pile and didn't get it pile. And then you just make that pile, and then you go over the didn't get it pile again, and just keep repeating that process. But yeah, that's kind of how I did it.
Yeah, I did the same thing where like I used that system, but I put it into digital flashcards.
Okay.
And whenever a flashcard came up with the meaning, I wrote it down by hand. So I would have notebooks just filled with handwritten kanji.
Oh yeah,
like I wrote them thousands of times. It was the same sort of thing, you know. If you know what it is, you put it off again till later, and if you don't know what it is, then you say it tomorrow, and you just keep that system rolling.
Right. This is what's basically, these are forms of spaced repetition.
SRS,
right? Yeah. So this is what has become sort of the de facto approach now for most folks for all of language learning, right? It's incorporated into so many systems now, this SRS. It's you get your flashcard. Did you know it well? Yeah. Okay. It's going to disappear for like 3 weeks or whatever. Did you know it? You didn't know it? Okay, it's going to show up again in an hour or a
That's
day,
what I did.
whatever you
Yeah.
set for it.
Yep. And that worked really well for me. Like I use an SRS system as well. Anki was really big when I first got here, but it didn't exist as an app yet. So I used a different thing that was kind of the same idea. Actually, when I first got here, the two big kanji dictionaries you could have that were really useful for writing in kanji were a Game Boy Advance game and and if you had the money for it, there was a guy who would refurbish a Dell Pocket PC with Eijiro on it. And I still have it, and it's still probably the best kanji input if you don't know stroke order.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's big. That's really helpful.
And it has Eijiro, which I like. Once Eijiro is, people are going to use a lot of different online dictionaries. Anything Jim Bream had a hand in.
The OG.
The Jedi dictionary back in the day.
Yeah.
And he's also just a really cool guy. Really
You've
nice
met
guy.
Jim Bream?
I've talked to him online. I have not met him personally.
Okay.
He frequents some online translator forums and super nice guy. But
we should have him on. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
But like Eijiro is like sort of the old school. This has been translated this way in the past. So if you wanted something that had a very English sounding phrasing, or how we might phrase something in English as opposed to being kind of stilted based on the Japanese, Eijiro was really good back in the day. It also had like
the DS thing, the Sonomama G10.
Yeah.
I technically have it. My former brother-in-law currently has my TS in all my games.
Oh man.
I've reminded him to return it, but and he is to be fair, I do pay for he's also one of my insurance people. He's my insurance dealer on a few things. So like it's not like we don't talk, but just expecting him to drive over one day and bring me a Game Boy is kind of it'll happen someday, I guess. Hopefully.
Okay.
But yeah, that was back in the day. That was kind of the you didn't have any other. When I got here, my first phone was a $20. You press the button and it popped open. It was a little flip phone.
Oh yeah, I have my Docomo flip phone here as well somewhere. Yeah, that was the best.
You'll understand this for you guys who are in Japan because you were back in the day. Is you no longer have a fob that you can put your keychains on.
Oh yeah.
And it's just like
Really?
That's true. I guess I
gotta be on the
about
case
that.
now, huh?
Yeah.
Because there used to be a little thing built into the phone.
Yes.
So you can
Definitely.
You have stuffed animals bigger than the phones on there.
I think now they have some obnoxious giant cases where they have clips on them, but
yeah.
So this is such a massive loss, I feel, for
Yes, a loss.
It's a big shift in culture.
A loss to culture itself.
Japan had a very rich cell phone culture for many years.
That is
before the smartphone took over.
They were ahead until 2008.
They were smartphones of their own variety, the Docomo iMode and all that stuff. Yeah.
Sekigaisen. Remember?
Given how much phones are starting to cost these days, I'm kind of like, can I go back to a $20 flip phone where I pay $20 a month for my phone bill? Like,
right.
I don't use my phone that much, really. I don't need to be paying. I can still find my way around without GPS. I'm not sure I need to be paying $70 a month for internet usage fees and all that junk.
It's definitely not cost effective. So you mentioned there was a Game Boy Advance game there, you said?
Andrew nailed the name.
That was DS, I think.
It was DS. I misspoke.
G10. All right. Yeah. That's how I got through playing Blue Dragon, was I used that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dang. That's some dedication.
I was like, I don't, this is the first time. Oh my God. I can just like, I don't need to know anything about the kanji. I could just write it. And I had like a bajillion vocab words in that. So
That was one of the
I wish I
best.
could
That was
just
a great
export
game.
it right now.
A great utility, whatever software.
No.
They did
No.
not realize how much that was going to help. Because it's
Oh
like
man.
if you it was great because if you think like all the kids who probably had a DS here in Japan, but they did not realize how much of a secondary market that was going to have among, you know,
Language learners,
people from other countries coming over and being ALTs. Just like I think every ALT who was a gamer had that, you know, for their DS.
Yeah, I wonder what the percentage of the market was that bought that software for DS. Like, was that were foreigners in Japan at the time?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
It's a great resource.
I can very easily imagine Japanese parents being like, "Well, I'll get this for you because it's educational."
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, like like your parents buying you Math Munchers or something.
So what games did you play when you were growing up? You know, other than Math Munchers?
If you name a game for SNES, I probably played it. And I still have I think like 30 something cartridges back in the US as well.
Bill Lambier's Combat Basketball?
I am aware of it and I've played it.
Who didn't rent that and return it quickly?
I know.
I'm pretty sure
somehow I had that and we played it and I was like, why do we have this? I do not remember even buying it. They know I don't like sports games.
I think I was hooked because it said combat on it.
Yeah, maybe that was it, but still, that was. Did you guys have games that just like showed up in your library? You don't know how they got there. That was one of those games for me.
Yeah, swap games with friends. Be like,
I have a copy of Shaq Fu back in the US. So.
Oh yeah, I definitely rented that, but that was like they knew that was. Everyone kind of knew that what you were getting into when you got that game. I feel like
I didn't. I just knew it was. I just knew I went to the game store and I had so much money and it was in the discount bin, so I got it for $20.
Oh man,
I'm sorry for your loss.
At the time, I think I was about 12, so I did not care.
Did you? So did you play a lot of like mainly fighting games, platformers, or? Was there a genre you really keyed into when you were a kid?
So when I was a kid, I played a lot of fighting games. I had Street Fighter Alpha 2 remains maybe my favorite fighting game of all time. And it's
you had the Super Nintendo version?
Yeah, I have 2 copies of it now.
It's a really remarkable conversion. Like I don't know how they got that to run so well there.
I wish they had incorporated more of the hidden stages from the Saturn version, but you know, like
Alpha 2 made it to Super Nintendo.
Was an incredible beast.
It's really good on Super Nintendo. Actually, it plays really smooth.
I was aware of Alpha, but I didn't know Alpha 2 made it to the Super Nintendo. Did Alpha 3 make it?
No.
Okay, copy that. All right, I did not know that. Okay.
Although it's on the Game Boy Advance for some reason.
Yeah, that had better hardware.
Yeah.
The Samurai Showdown was another one. Me and my friends played a lot. And then there were a lot of RPGs because I guess we had time when we were kids.
Yeah. Yes.
Played a lot of Chrono Trigger, a lot of Final Fantasy 6 or 3 as it was.
Yeah.
We actually had a copy of FF6 from the US, from Japan rather. And there was a little cartridge you could stick into your SNES, and you'd stick the game in, and it would reset the system somehow, and you'd pull everything out and then put the cartridge in again, and it would run Super Famicom games from Japan.
Yeah.
So our copy of FF6 was from here. I guess like one of our friend group. My friend David had a really nerdy dad, so his dad was the guy who imported all that stuff back when.
So I had a guy who imported, but it was only for it was this guy who worked at the pizza place where we used to play Street Fighter 1, and he had imported the Super Famicom version of Street Fighter 2 well in advance of the American release, and we went over to his house and saw his adapter for it and everything, and it was just like, can we stay here all night?
Yeah.
We couldn't read it. We knew we knew from playing the English game kind of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
okay,
I think somebody had a guidebook, like a Prima guides or Prima guides from back in the day. Different, probably not them actually, but so we had kind of a reference.
Yeah.
What was the other? I remember before Pokemon came out, playing Pokemon Green on emulation on my PC as well. You know, I know I wouldn't like don't emulate, kids, but
but you were a kid once as well, so
yeah. So
before you're professional.
And I remember
what was a kid with no money supposed to do?
I remember playing through most of that game because a friend told me how to set up, like, oh, if you get this, you can play Game Boy games on your PC, and I was like, oh, cool, and you should check out the Pokemon, and we knew it was going to come out in America in the next couple of months. I remember playing through most of that game in Japanese, having no idea what I was just kind of putting together from game mechanics what I was supposed to do.
I got a Japanese Dreamcast, my first import system when I was a kid, and I got Shenmue well before anybody else did, I think, in America at least, and I didn't know anything what was going on. But I thought, I mean, it was definitely like a huge jump in technology at the time. So that part was great. And the other one, I guess a little bit before that, but we had Toe Ball #2, which is a Squaresoft fighting game, which was, in my memory, I guess other than Sonic Adventure for Dreamcast, but that came out in America. So I guess I could say Toe Ball #2 was like the best import gaming experience I ever had in my entire life, because it never came out in America, and it was just, it had like literally like 100 characters you could choose from or something, like a fighting game, and you could fight as Chocobo or whatever in it because it was Square, and great stuff.
Oh, that's crazy.
That's lost to time.
Celebrated.
Yeah.
So you started out back in the day playing these games, not understanding any of the Japanese, and now you're translating games.
I wouldn't have, and that's a toast to youth, because I don't think I would have the patience for that now if I didn't know Japanese. I'll play something else.
Yeah, exactly. That's cool. So we're gonna jump to like actual translation talk now.
All right. Yeah. Sorry.
No. It's okay. It's okay. So could you tell us the difference in your mind? What's the difference between localization translation and transcreation?
Okay. So this is a popular topic, isn't it? If we're talking just kind of industry standard language, anything I work in now is localization. If you're a translator, if you're an editor, whatever you do on game stuff today tends to be called localization. I've done a little work in anime and manga stuff as well, but I don't know those industries as in and out as I know game stuff. It's not my forte per se. But with game translation, people will use the terms translation and localization almost interchangeably. I feel like people kind of invent definitions for them, where like translation is kind of a you're more like working like an machine translation, an MT system almost, where you just kind of almost like you're diagramming sentences, but as though it were translation work. And then localization is somehow changing the words to fit. And arguably this is true in a non outside of the industry itself. You're changing the words to suit the audience you're targeting. And I mean, that is true. Technically, that is what it means. But if you're working on a project as a translator, you're never translating anything without an audience in mind. Or at least if you're a professional, you shouldn't be.
Right.
There are a few exceptions. A lot of games get translated from Japanese into English, and then they hit the broad language spectrum where you have German, French, Spanish. So it's going into every other European language. We'll put it that way. So in that case, sometimes you have to make the script simpler or include more notes, just so that the Spanish speaking person working from English into Spanish isn't playing so much of a game of telephone between you and the Japanese.
Oh, okay.
Transcreation is definitely a different thing. That's like here's the subject matter, here's the content, write something new.
Right.
And that does happen, and it makes sense within certain contexts. Advertising is a big one. If you do anything for like Fujitsu, if like I've done work for Fujitsu in the past, are
you at liberty to speak of this? Is that okay? Or
they have a bunch of the yes, I like. Okay. Sorry, yes, I can talk about. I think I can probably.
It's well past. It's well in the past.
I haven't talked to them in a couple of years, so they probably aren't going to come after me. A lot of the tech companies put out what's called like a MOOC, which is magazine book, which is weird because like I
always found that a funny term,
right? Because like a MOOC is like a schmuck.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
But they put out these really long magazines basically about everything they're doing, and I would translate those. And for most of that, it's IT stuff, so it's very one-to-one translation. There's not you're pretty much following the Japanese straight on. But for certain sections that were more advertising or more promotion oriented, I'd have a certain amount of levity or freedom. And in those cases, I don't know, my mouth keeps drying out.
It's hot.
I guess I killed the fans, but otherwise my hair would be doing the water world thing. You basically, here's the content, here's the message we want to get across. You have 250 words or this much space on the page. Write something, which is kind of great because you get in those cases I was paid pretty much the same, but I had to read the Japanese and be like, oh, okay, this is what we're going for, and I just write 250 word little essay and pop it in.
Right.
Yeah.
So like translation and localization, yes, are arguably different, but within an industry setting, there are very few times where you're not writing with an audience in mind. So they are used pretty interchangeably, almost like localizations become a buzzword for translation a lot of the time. I do a lot of editing as well, which I'm sure some people would like to call transcreation because sometimes I rewrite dialogue, but generally speaking, they are kind of the same thing.
So could you tell us a little bit about your process there and how these different roles work out? So you've worked in translation, localization, and as an editor. Now this is a different role from directly translating something. What is your process like? You're especially working as a freelance translator. What is your process like? What are you getting from the developers or whatever? What does it look like? What does it look like when you're an editor? Could you tell us about those different roles?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So when I get something from, there's two types of scenarios, generally speaking. Either I have a direct client or I'm working through an agency. Agencies will work with a bunch of different game companies, a bunch of different game devs, and kind of field prices and product and send them on, field outsource stuff to freelancers. Direct clients are game devs that I've talked to, and they're like, hey, like, oh, you're a translator. Would you do our game? Like, can you take a look at our script and tell us how much it would cost and that sort of thing? Indie dev jobs are awesome just because when you know the client and they're kind of getting into stuff, they're not so bossy and they really treat you as part of the team. Not that all major devs are jerks, but they have they have their system and they have their timetables, and you need to work within their frame a little bit more. But usually I'll get files in one of two formats really. It either comes prepackaged for a CAT tool, which is a translation software, which is computer assisted translation tool, or or it's just an Excel file.
Okay.
Love those spreadsheets.
Yeah, and it's just cells. Yeah. Here's the Japanese. Put the English here. Here's the notes. Leave any notes for us here, and then usually there's a bunch of cells after that for like. Oh, sorry. A cat just jumped on my balcony. I don't know how they get up here. It's not my cat.
You called for cats. Something that
you just said cat tool.
Yeah.
Wow, you summoned them.
I suppose that must be it. Yeah. But yeah, it's amazing how much Japan loves Excel files. And depending on the game, I will get nothing, or I will get for some, I'll get no background info whatsoever. The extreme version is you get just a script with no character names, no genders, no nothing.
Oh my god.
Fortunately, that doesn't happen that often, but everybody's got a horror story where they got a script that was grouped by character. It wasn't even in order of the story. It was just, here's all this character's lines. Here's all the next character's lines.
Right.
Wow.
And you don't know how they fit together. And if you want to know why literal the idea of literal word-to-word translation doesn't work, those are the games people usually complain about sounding weird.
Yeah.
Because the translator had no idea who was talking to who or how it fit together.
I mean, if someone hands you a turd, you can polish it, but it's still a turd.
Yeah, you can only polish so much, and usually you're on a deadline, so there's really a limited amount of polishing that can be done. But for the most part, I get a script where I have the character's name, who's talking to who, and usually, but not always, the gender of the character, which is, as you both know, like, because you both speak Japanese, being able to know which pronouns to use is a significant benefit when you're trying to figure out what something means or how to say something in English. And then in nicer situations, I get a big old Word doc that has breakdowns of all the character backgrounds, the story so far, what the general plot is. And for a couple of the games I'm working on that I can't talk about, we actually, because a lot of gacha games I work on, for some reason gacha games I'm not usually allowed to talk about working on which ones I work on, but they do a lot of public announcements on things like Instagram and Twitter and Facebook when new stuff is coming out, and they'll send us the Japanese image of the ad. Of the black ad, and I can just look at that, and I look at the Japanese, and I'm like, oh, okay, like this is how these little pictures and all the text and everything fits together, and that's the best. Like when I actually,
you've got the full context there.
Yeah, like Phantasy Star Online 2 was one that we mentioned, one that I mentioned working on, and Romancing Saga 3. Those games have been out a while, so I could go play them. And in some cases they would actually, I don't remember for either of those in particular, but sometimes you actually get paid to go play the game before you start working on it, and that is awesome. Like
that's awesome.
Like hey, I'm gonna spend 30 hours of my weekend playing a game so I can work on it next week, and they're like, well, we'll pay you. You will?
That's awesome.
Like, thank you.
Yeah. That seems entirely appropriate, though. Like, it's funny because we look at it like, oh my God, this is an amazing benefit. But at the same time, it's like, if you want it done really well, it seems like it would be in their best interest to have you do that.
if you look at some of the packages or that people put together about localization and some of the panels that people do at different conventions and stuff, they'll talk about these are what we want from game devs, and it is all this information. And sometimes you get it, and it's great. But I look at that and like, oh, you know, like I just imagine the jobs people want if you work for like Nintendo, especially because they do a lot of stuff in house. But like if you're in house with Square Enix or Capcom, or you're working maybe out of California, and I don't know how the agencies operate out there, but my impression is they have access to a lot more immediately. I don't know if that's true. Don't hold me to that. I'm sorry for anybody that knows me, and I'm lying. But the amount of the amount of information available from game devs to initial teams, and the amount that gets passed on can vary dramatically. And you're like, I'm always grateful for like anything. So the amount of time I spend on YouTube, like watching Japanese people play through video games, so I can be like, oh, that's what that scene is like.
Okay, right.
So what about in the position of editor? So you mentioned you've got the CAT tool, you've got Excel. When you're in a position of editor, do you have access to more information by necessity? Is this
usually it's through I'm with the same teams. A lot of the people I work with where I'm translating are a lot of the people I work with where I'm editing. So the available information doesn't really change.
Okay.
Editor is a weird role because it and I was talking to Zach about this on Twitter the other day, because there was a little bit of a discussion about what does it mean to be an editor versus a translator versus you know all these other potential job titles, because editing can be such a, you know, sometimes I'm just there to check grammar and make sure everything fits. Sometimes I have to read all the Japanese and compare it to all the English to cross-check to make sure nothing's mistranslated. And sometimes I'm really there to like punch up the writing. And that's kind of why I get a lot of work as an editor, is because of my creative writing background. And what they want is, okay, the translator did a good job. And sometimes there's very little to do anything. Like the translator is a great writer in their own respect, and many translators are, but you know, to make sure characterization's consistent, that like characters always talk the same way and make the same kind of jokes, to make sure things like Shenmue, for example, talking about Shenmue, like has these great sort of expository block text sections. And you want those written a certain way. You want them to emulate a certain type of tone. You know, you want them to have this kind of like Wing Chun action movie dialect to them.
Right.
And so like, yeah, the translator wrote great text, but I just have to come in and like add a little bit of that tone to it to make it kind of seat itself correctly in the game.
I love Shenmue so much.
You must have been pretty stoked when they were like, "Oh, we're gonna make a third one."
Yeah. Oh my God.
He's a producer.
I never gave up.
Okay.
You know,
I'm
a producer. I put some money into it.
I heard that might be the case. Somebody had whispered that to me.
But yeah, no, I love Shenmue. I could never get enough of it. And all these years, it was almost like a joke. Like we're just never going to see a continuation of this, but I'll never give up the fight. I'll never give up my dream of Shenmue completing. And then they told us we're getting 3 and I was all excited and I ended up loving it.
The game doesn't end.
But yeah, that's the thing.
We need a 4.
So now I got to wait another 19 years. So
are you going to produce number 4?
Oh yeah, I got $100 ready to go for it. Throw in the Kickstarter. I bet $100 to get a producer credit. I'll take it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's your bio in Twitter.
God,
producer.
Shenmue is just such an amazing creature. It really is, and I think a lot of it has to do with the voice performances being in the first one so varied in quality. so strange in some ways, but just so lovable. It's like the perfect B game that was on a AAA budget, before AAA budgets were really a thing. I could talk forever about Shenmue. That's where I have to stop.
Shenmue cast coming next year.
But like Shenmue is just a great example because it has, like, we talk about like legacy terms and stuff. Like with Romancing Saga, so much of it's legacy stuff. Where you have to use certain character names, you have to use certain monster names, item names, abilities. Everything follows kind of what came out in like 1993.
Yeah.
But and Shenmue as well. There is a B movie tone to the script that if they didn't write it that way, if it didn't hold, like, and every once in a while you see a review that complains about it and you're like, clearly you didn't play 1 and 2. But it's not bad translation. It's translated a way to fit a certain mood and tone.
It felt like Shenmue, and that's
exactly
what it
and and that's what a good editor does. Or even in a lot of cases, usually you don't have the budget for an editor, so a good translator has to do that.
Right.
And see, that was one of my main concerns going into this, because when Shenmue 3 was announced, I was like, look, we're in a very different time when it comes to localization. Things are just better quality across the board, it seems to me. And I'm worried, that Shenmue 3 is going to lose something in this process, as we are now just doing things well. I kind of want them done slightly poorly, like they were in 1999 and 2000 or whatever. And it just nailed it. I just felt like it nailed the perfect balance with Shenmue 3.
I'm sure you know the guys as well, but yeah, I know the guys who worked on that, and I remember looking over that script, and yeah, they were. It was they definitely had it in mind while they were working on it as well.
Like they're even just
that's awesome.
There's a woman in Bailu Village who says something that's just so. It's so like it's perfect for the scene, but it's also really awkward. And I was like, I am so glad that this exists, because I was worried this wouldn't be there. and this is what really builds that in his sense of endearment for it.
I think that's one thing that gets overlooked with like the whole localization argument is a lot of people have the concern that you mentioned, is that it's just going to be done in kind of it's as though we were using some sort of machine translation that's some kind of different machine translation from the old one that nobody likes now. But I think I'm working on. I'm currently editing on about half a dozen games right now.
Wow!
And I spend probably a quarter of my time reading fan wikis, like going or watching gameplay videos from previous games, or playing the previous games myself, to see how it was done before. We want to keep the tone. We want to keep the style of the older games as well. We're not just ditching it in favor of the update. We're very aware of what the community base looks like, and we try to, we're not just trying to cut them out or anything. It's some of the arguments online seem like it's translators versus fans or something, but for the most part, a lot of us are fans, and a lot of us try to key into what the fans are doing, or what they have done, especially if the game has been in Japan forever and hasn't come out in English yet. We'll like
that Romancing Saga was like that, right?
Yeah, you want to incorporate what the people who love that game have already done the work on.
Did Romancing Saga already have, so that had like a fanlation?
So
probably.
And I don't remember if they came out in English before or not. They were re-released for the iOS kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
And they were re-released on various systems. I think they're on PC as well. Like you can play 2 and 3 on Switch, or not Switch, Steam. I really recommend 3. 3 is a great. If you like old school Japanese RPGs, play 3.
Okay.
If you if you want something really punishing, you can play 2. It's a good,
Yeah.
it's a great game, but it's
I
challenging.
was reading the reviews of it that people found it was too difficult. They didn't know where they were going next, what they were supposed to be doing. And
yeah, you have to figure some stuff out, but it's still a really good game. Like it has a good script. But yeah, with those, 3, especially there was a fan translation done where fans had taken, I think 2 and 3. I don't think they included the first one, but they kind of did a game hack, a ROM hack, where they compiled the 2 games together. Because those games are kind of like Rogue Legacy, where when you die, you become your ancestor, or you become your descendant, rather.
Oh, wow.
And they kind of put the 2 games together and extended and made the stories extend into each other, and did some optimization stuff so you couldn't like soft lock yourself out of the game.
Okay.
And yeah, there was a lot of stuff where fans had already kind of decided on terminology. Although that's a great one, because there were a lot of terms in Japanese for like Demon King and stuff that hadn't really been settled on. And so we actually the team I worked with was able to decide and work out a system for naming those major characters as well, that didn't have weren't like Jojo, or like didn't have like a clear name already.
Yeah.
So
Mao
yeah, it was
was probably harder. Mao, right? Demon King.
Yeah. There's a lot of that.
Yeah, that's got to be kind of hard to translate. I mean, even stuff like Shinigami, that's recently has become something that anime fans just know, as is a Shinigami. But I'm sure that was probably hard to translate back in the day.
I remember like some of my early translation work in games, because I started off doing research translation. Some of my early game translation work was, let's say, adult oriented.
Okay.
And one of the a friend was working on the same game I was, and I was like, "How do you handle moe? Like, how do you?" And he said, "For this audience, for this type of game, you don't really need to translate it.
Right.
People will know what it is, so just use moe." And for some games, you can't do that. Like for a lot of anime and stuff, you can't do that. But for the game we were working on, like it was actually a card battling game, adult card battling. Like the card type was moe, and I was like, what card type can I like? Fluffy, cute. And he was like, just mark the card type as moe. It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
The people who want to play a game with a card type of moe feel that moe deep in their soul, and it doesn't need to be translated.
If you want to play Magic the Gathering, but it's idols with. Right.
Do you think that we're going to jump into like more like cultural differences here? But I was just wondering, do you think that the Japanese want something different from stories and storytelling than an American audience? Like they want to. This is actually a question kind of from Mel Oak, but that I've been asking ever since he brought it up. But he was saying that they might, like, the audiences kind of want different types of stories, I guess, or I don't know. Like there's obviously different taste in games in general. It seems like, I mean, it's always melding together and getting the gap is getting narrower and narrower as we go along. But like comparing like Gears of War versus Final Fantasy or something, like there's obviously
good point.
Different markets here, right?
Yeah. That's a really good question, isn't it? that is like you could do a podcast just with that question.
Yeah.
I feel like a number of people have built careers off of that question. Legends of localization, Matt Alt, like some of our shared favorite people who work out of this industry and related industries. So, like, that's the question they work to answer. Um,
Right.
I think it's less and less true,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a exposure thing. I think before, there's that whole Japan in isolation was perfect, or like got better because they weren't exposed to other things. Or my favorite, did you ever see the anime movie Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, the second Vampire Hunter D movie?
Oh, I didn't see Bloodlust. I only saw the first one.
I haven't seen it either.
There's a bit where they cross through this nightmare city where the Vampire Hunter D character, who's basically Alucard from Castlevania, has to fight these nightmare creatures, and they're the Barbaroi, which hilariously enough, like I didn't know this until I started working in games, that Barbaroi is a term that comes up in a variety of video games, and just like, that's interesting. They like Japanese latches onto certain lore and puts it in everything. But the like crazy old man who leads the evil nightmare creature says something like, 1,000 years of isolation have made us indomitable. And like, the idea is that by being cut off from everything, they've become superhuman. And like, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like the opposite of how you get good at something.
Right.
And I think you notice it with older Japanese games, or games based on older Japanese games, that there's definitely something sort of like an ineluctable quality of Japaneseness. But with more modern games, I see that dying down or becoming a mixture. It's still not, they're not just making Gears of War, but they are making Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, definitely.
Like there's these elements that are coming into the story. So I feel with modern stories, more and more we're kind of looking for the same things. Like, one of the things I can never get over is how big Dead by Daylight is here.
Oh, right.
Really?
Which is, it's for people who don't know, one person plays a classic monster, and 4 people play survivors, and they have to fix generators around a level while the killer character tries to murder them.
There's a kid in my Japanese group here that says that he plays with only Japanese people. I thought that was just him, but I guess it's huge over there, huh?
My brother-in-law was big on it on PC, not PC, on PlayStation, and there's even different metas. It's like a fighting game almost, where certain character, like for a long time here in Street Fighter 4, for example, Hakan, who's like a big Turkish wrestler character from the Street Fighter 4 game, was like, everybody's like, that's a dead character, it doesn't exist in meta. And then the West, or well, I guess the Koreans as well, started developing a meta for that character. And so it's the same with like Dead by Daylight, where certain villain characters have a really strong meta in Japan, but in the West, like in America or something, are like, no, that's stupid. They're not good.
Yeah,
So
it's definitely that whole, I always see this with, fighting games and the tier list issue, right? With like tier lists are made to follow what people are playing. It's up to you to find out what's going to put somebody in that top tier, and you could probably find it.
Well, especially like now that the tournament world is closed in a little bit, like Americans, Canadians, Brazilians, the French, a lot of people like using characters that you just don't see coming.
Yeah.
And Japanese, maybe it's because the Japanese players are just too good. So you got to find some way to work around them. Throw something at them they don't see coming. But yeah, like a lot of games that I guess that's not the best example, because that is almost a fighting game in terms of structure. It's not an RPG. It's not some long-winded plot. One example that recurs in my memory from when I was studying lit, because I also part of my major was poetry, was talking about haiku and haiku writing. And one of the big differences I noticed between English and Japanese haiku, and I think this translates somewhat to video games as well, is a lot of haiku, the third line or the final syllables, because traditional Japanese haiku are just one line. There's not this 3-line business. There's just one long line. There's a turn. There's a twist. And a lot of good English poetry is the same. Like there's a third act. But that's not always true in Japanese writing or Japanese haiku. It is true in a lot of it. There's the toad that jumps in water and then splash. Splash is kind of your turn at the end, your surprise. But I got that wrong enough. Somebody's going to complain about it, but people know people know what I'm talking about. The frog and pot haiku. I think people know that one. But some are just imagery. It's just 3 lines that create a scene of natural beauty.
Yeah. Okay. I know you're going with this. Yeah.
And I think that translates to games to a certain extent. Like in a lot of American dev type games, if a game has kind of a through long story, we want a third act twist. We want a, or Shakespearean act 4. And I think that's still true, that we like that. It doesn't have to be a surprise, but something has to change. There has to be a climax and denouement. But like Japanese, not always. And I think that still remains true to a certain extent. I think Japan's adopted a lot of, or it was always there. It's become more pronounced. They've always had that same sense of storytelling, but it's become more pronounced as our media places more of an influence on their media.
You're saying they need less closure in the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like we still have that a lot, but it's more of like an indie thing. Like in a AAA game, not as much. You don't see that as much. But like in indie stuff, you see that a little bit more, I think.
There when you talk about the haiku thing, that's something that I think I can key into, because, like, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you know more than I do, but like there'll be like 3 lines in it, and it's like they're just kind of describing ambience. It's kind of, you know what I mean? It's you're supposed to get a feel for the room or for that place in nature, but nothing necessarily happens. It's just a description of atmosphere, I guess. And God, now I feel like you unlocked a key in my brain, because I feel like even like Ghibli or something is like that.
That really worked for me as well. It made me start thinking immediately about my initial reactions to slice of life anime.
Yeah. Yes.
Where I was just like, whoa, nothing happened.
I think a lot of the
now
haiku
I'm like, nothing happened, and it was good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to kind of rewire your brain a little bit.
I'm just spending time with these characters, and I'm happy about it.
And I think we're seeing more of that too. And like I play a lot of indie games, so I play some AAA stuff, but because who doesn't? But I do spend a lot of time with indie games where that's more common. I think like they'll let you spend time with characters and immerse yourself in a story rather than what's kind of funny is I remember hearing this complaint about people who didn't like the Wheel of Time book series was that there's too many side quests that have nothing to do with the main plot. Right. Even when I was a teen and I hadn't read any of that yet, and I've only read like the first book, so I'm not that well versed per se, but excuse me. I remember hearing this argument that there's these things they do that do nothing to move the main story along. I'm like, it's a side quest.
Right.
But like this podcast, which is Gaming Gaiden. Like,
exactly. That's what we're all about.
Boom.
Said the title. Roll credits.
Yeah, the titular line.
Yeah, that I think, yeah, exactly like what Mike touched on. You know, you spend time and there's not even always the resolution you want. Sometimes things just go on. Like Shenmue. Uh and but you're okay with it. You know, it's still, you're still glad of the experience. You still enjoyed the game.
Yeah.
I'm playing
And I think
Xenoblade 3 now,
Oh
and
man.
there's it's still very Japanese, but like the cutscenes or something. I don't know what it is. It does feel like there's a lot of America in there somewhere. The America DNA is seeping in, I think. I've noticed this more on this game than in other games, I think, for some reason.
I sometimes wonder about this. You know, this is one of those commercial issues, right? Of like marketing globally. You know that your money is going to come more from outside the Japanese market. And it's like,
Yeah.
how does that affect your creative process? How does that affect the structure and design? And
Yeah. You got to maintain the otherness as well, as Matt Alt likes to call it, or I think he did anyway.
I wonder to what extent it's also just Japan becoming less isolated.
Definitely.
You know, I mentioned Metal Gear Solid before, and that is just a wealth of childhood influences that weren't Japanese.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
right.
some of them are, but like the ones that stand out to us are the ones that aren't, right? You know, like Escape from LA and stuff like that.
Kojima loves American movies, so
I like that he went with like Snake Plissken. I was like, yeah, Kurt Russell deserves a few video games about him. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's sort of that, but you know, you think of like a lot of game devs are older, so they're gonna have different influences from the 80s and 90s. They're gonna have kind of a Stranger Things vibe to their games. But yeah, I like, you know, a lot of kids who are coming up today who are making games are seeing a lot of stuff from the West. And I think to some extent people don't realize how much of the American television experience ends up in Japan. I mean, I've all of Game of Thrones. I really like Burn Notice. Burn Notice was on TV here, which is, you know, set. It's a spy show set in Miami. It's just like
with Bruce Campbell, right?
With Bruce Campbell. That's the important.
That's really. I think you buried the lead there. That's the most important.
My apologies.
Prison Break was big in Japan, strangely enough. That wasn't that big in America, I feel like.
I feel like it was bigger here.
Yeah, I think it was. It's one of those strange things. The reverse Cowboy Bebop effect, I call it. Because anyway, keep going.
No, I remember when I was teaching, one of my teachers told me she watched Desperate Housewives, and I was like, "What?"
I mean, it's all streaming and shit too now, right? Like
what?
Streaming. That's definitely like the gap is getting, you know, much narrower than it used to be in all kinds of ways. Like, and we see like, you know, people commenting on Japan very openly in TikTok, things like that. I mean, we're just seeing constant cultural exchange happening 24/7 all the time. So whereas like people wouldn't have these conversations too much before, now you can kind of get on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, or watch a Netflix show and you know, the cultural, like we keep saying, the cultural divide is just keep getting narrower and narrower. I mean, you know, like we said earlier in the podcast, I was in Japan from 06 to 09. 09 doesn't feel that long ago, but man, it just feels like, from what I can gather anyway, and I don't know for sure, but it just seems like the amount of exposure to Western stuff compared to Japan in 2009 to 2022 is real stark. You know, people really, I mean, again, we had the internet, we had YouTube in 09, but it's just such a different beast now. It's just, I mean, we're definitely going to like worldwide monoculture. It just feels like we're definitely getting to the worldwide melting pot for sure.
You don't have to wait for someone to pick up physical distribution rights and all that stuff.
Yeah,
like, oh, we're gonna put this DVD out and it's gonna take 2 years. Now it's just like, it streams simulcast or something.
Oh yeah, definitely. Kids are
Sorry,
learning
Matt, you were
English
gonna say
on
something.
Netflix.
No. I've said plenty.
No. You're here to be interviewed. So
Jabberjaw.
sorry.
What I was just thinking, like, I know some people would argue that like that's the result of localization, that we're choosing to make scripts more American facing. And I think based on our discussion, we kind of made the point. No, that's not where this is coming from. This is coming from something that's happening culturally. I don't know about the whole world, but I do about Japan, America. I do know, and in that case, between our two countries. Fortunately, though, like you said, sometimes, or like Mike said, sometimes you still, or I think you both made examples. You still get that sense of this is something different from the type of story I am used to, and that comes out of the Japanese upbringing of the game dev and the story writer. And, like it's always going to be, everybody's different. But I do like that aspect of just being in an environment and enjoying the story for what it is without any kind of pushed climax or turn or something.
Yeah. I feel like the big cultural shift now with that, the strongest sense of the other is the wholesome game design of like Animal Crossing, and now this the new Crayon Shin-chan is the new Boku no Natsu Yasumi kind of game, where like, I don't really have a particular objective. It's slice of life as a game, and I think that's I think we're going to see that influencing a lot more Western development.
Cozy games, they call it.
Cozy games.
Cozy games.
It's a big part of Shenmue too, is doing all the stuff that isn't the main story.
Man, Shenmue was just like light years ahead of everything. I don't know what to say. I don't understand people who are like, "Oh, I don't play Shenmue. I didn't play it."
I like Japanese stuff from day one, but for some reason, with video games, if it didn't have like a clear point, I was not into it. Like for a while, but like platformers A to B, understood that perfectly fine. But as I get older, I'm accepting more and more of things that don't have a clear point.
Was the Yakuza games do that really well as well, right? Like they have it's not even side quests. Like what's the game where you're the hacker guy? Something dog.
Watch Dogs?
Yeah, like where you have a lot of side quests, but they're still part of the thing. Where like Yakuza and Shenmue have things that just it has nothing to do with any of the story. It's not even really side quests. It's just you going off and doing stuff in the world for the sake of doing stuff in the world.
Yeah. I'm gonna go take care of that cat at the shrine.
Sandbox
doesn't affect anything else in the game. It's just I took care of the cat. His name is Tama. It's wonderful.
I feel like this is nice. I'm learning a lot about Mike.
Yeah, you love Shenmue, man. I liked it, but I don't like it as much as you do. I feel like
I think every day that goes by, I like it a little more.
I don't know that anyone likes it as much as Mike does, but yeah.
Wow.
Oh, I've seen the websites. There's definitely people who like it more than I do.
A lot of producers out there.
I'm kidding. I am kidding, of course. There's obviously that third game wouldn't have been made if there weren't so many people that were crazy about that series.
Yeah, and I'm glad it came this much later, because if I had gotten Shenmue 3 without an ending when I was 24 or 25, I would have been pissed about it. And now that I'm older and ostensibly wiser and at least calmer, it's like, this is cool, man. It's all right. You go make another game. You just go ahead. Do what you got to do. All right.
Is it 3 or 2 where you spend like the latter part of the game, like you're just like kind of running through the wilderness to get to the point where you're supposed to track down the killer?
That would be in 3. Well,
that's the end. That's the end of 3.
Actually,
Spoilers.
You just described 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. It's been a little while.
Yeah.
Actually, it was one of the cool things when that game came out. I don't know if it was intentional, but with the Steam version, you got the scripts as well. They were just in the file folder.
Oh wow.
Oh, what?
I don't remember if that was intentional. I don't remember if that was intentional or if you were supposed to get them or it was just how they packaged the files. But
oh man.
That's really interesting. I got to look into that because if that is true and it has multi-language support, then that could be a really nice learning resource.
Yeah. You'll have to Google it because I don't know if I'm phrasing it quite how it was, but I remember, that at least when the game first came out on Steam, you had access to at least both the English and Japanese scripts.
Wow. That's
just
definitely something I'm going to be looking into.
You could just read them like you were a translator or an editor because you already have the translation.
Oh, but then I would have to throw them into Excel. I don't want to do that.
They're probably already prepackaged as Excel files.
Use MemoQ, by the way. MemoQ.
MemoQ is the one I use a lot now. You guys talk to Mel. I do a lot of work with him. When I started out, Trados was the big one. SDL Trados.
I remember that. Yeah.
I own a copy of it that I haven't touched in a couple of years, just because I use whatever my clients want me to use.
Right.
If they want me to use Excel, if they want me to use Word, if they want me to use MemoQ, that's what I'm going to use. MemoQ tends to be the popular one right now. And after using it, I think I've been using MemoQ pretty heavily for the last 5-6 years. Yes, there's a lot to complain about. In the same way that there's a lot to complain about with Excel or Word. But you get used to working in that environment, and it's definitely better than just having a Word document. It does make the work easier and flow better.
Cool.
Especially on Teams. Like teams, you're always going to have communication. Especially because some projects, they'll tell you in your NDA, your non-disclosure agreement, don't talk to anyone, which means don't talk to anyone else on the team that you're on.
Whoa!
So you can't even talk to the other translators. Even you're not supposed to know who else is on the project, but it's a community. People find out.
Is Slack a thing in Japan? Slack being used?
I don't know what it's like for you guys with work communication, but it seems like every 2 years I'm on a different communication, some kind of Slack-like program. I do have two Slack tabs constantly open in my screen at all times because that's what 2 of my clients still use for everything. That's the group communication is on Slack, and then 3 or 4 other programs over the last 8 years that were kind of the same thing have gone through. Some teams I still talk through Skype. Some people we use Discord. It seems like there's always, but yes, to answer your question, I'm sorry, let me give a 5-minute answer to a two-word question. Yes, Slack is a thing in Japan, and we do use it on occasion.
Some people are faxing, some people are on Slack.
Yeah.
Oh God, even 2009, not having a fax machine in my house made it hard to work with certain clients.
Oh my God.
Yeah, now it's fine. Now it's fine.
That's become famous at this point.
So I'd like to get back to one of the points that came up a little earlier, right? In this globalization marketing around the world. And it looks like most of the revenue will come from outside of Japan for Japanese developers, right? And why do you think that Japan has been so successful in selling their culture worldwide?
Was what was that video, the YouTube video, the entire history of the world, I guess. And then, there's another one that's the entire history of Japan. But there's the post-war economic miracle.
Yeah.
I think we fell into video games at the right time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Based on when Japan hit its bubble, which I would love it if they got back to, because I would just stay in Japan and make all the money. But doesn't seem to be happening 30 years on, 40 years on. But I think we hit it at the right time. There's a few great documentaries on how the Nintendo system itself and the Game & Watch systems ended up being distributed throughout Europe and throughout America, and how people got the rights to those, and they entered toy stores and became a big thing. So I mean, that history is part of it as well. Just the Nintendo. I mean, Game & Watch a little bit. But we also had like Tiger toys. But the Nintendo, after it was the right time, and they had just the perfect system. It was
the video game economy or whatever market crashed, and then Atari was dead in the water. Video games were a fad that was over, and then Nintendo swooped in, right?
You talked about this in your Superman video games video.
Oh yeah,
where Mike gave a very critical review of Superman for the Atari.
Oh yeah,
that was kind of like fair enough. But,
yeah,
it's got three things: you get the bridge, you fix the bridge. But it's like it's a very clear game. What's the problem here?
It's a different time,
but no, it's a good point. The jump, I think, too. Yeah, like so you had the crash, and then it just came sweeping back in, and just the leap in graphics as well. Like Atari was fun, but it wasn't ready yet. There's only so much you can do, and it's funny when you look back at the PS1 games and stuff you played when you were younger, and you were like, oh, this was the uncanny valley, like it's starting to look so real. You look back now and you're like,
yeah,
maybe not so much.
Few steps away from the uncanny valley, at least.
Those or early Shenmue games, or Virtua Fighter back in the day. It's like, oh 3D,
man,
3D, it's so good.
I had a friend that was, I guess, unfamiliar with the Saturn, because not many were, but he, when Virtua Fighter came out like a year ago or so, again on PS4, 5, or whatever. Yeah, there you go. He's showing up for the
That's the watch, eh?
Yeah, he's got the watch. Sega Saturn watch.
Has Virtua Fighter 2 in it.
Nice.
Oh, that is an awesome touch.
That's awesome. So he told me, like, I wish that they had their blocky look. I liked it when they had that look. And I was like, it wasn't a look, man. It was 1994. It was all they could do. It was cutting edge technology. He thought that like that was a look they were going for. He was our age too. And I was like, you must not know, like, Virtua Fighter 3 or whatever, like by the time they got to Aoi's like flowing kimono, that was completely fucking revolutionary at the time. Yeah. They were just always at the absolute edge of technology at the time anyway. The edge, like the best graphics ever were Virtua Fighter, better than Tekken for a while.
Yeah. It's funny now because there are games that are trying to emulate that look of like a PS1 game.
So weird, but people have nostalgia. I get it.
I mean, I think it works the same way as I like the old 32-bit RPG games, like Super Nintendo graphics. That was the peak. We peaked there. Things haven't looked better. Things haven't looked better than that.
Yeah, the sprites.
That's my opinion as well. I think
that's
Chrono Trigger is like,
my
I don't know why they keep talking about this HD 2D thing, because like I've played it and I like the engine that they've got going, like for Live Alive and all that. But Chrono Trigger, don't touch it. Don't touch it. Just show it up as is. It's good.
Maybe you remember this when they released the PC edition. They did it with the updated graphics.
Yeah,
and there was such an outcry that you can turn them off now.
Nice.
I think it took like a month.
Before
the outcry got them to be like, fine, we've included the old graphics. Please just buy it.
This was easier anyway. You should have told us earlier.
You didn't have to add anything new. You could have done what every company is doing and just used like a shell emulation mod.
Right.
That's what I've been saying all along. Is like, just put the goddamn ROM out there. Nobody cares. Like, just make it the way it was. It's fine.
Exactly. Like I mean, I emulated games and stuff when I was in high school and that, and you know, if you can't afford it, or it's like it's probably never getting a release, I understand the appeal of like a MAME cabinet and that, obviously. But if I have the option to own it legally, and if it's especially if it's part of a collection, you know, like Capcom and Konami are doing all these collections, I'm like, yeah, I'll pay. Like I want to have it registered in my account, so I just have it easy access forever.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I bought Chrono Trigger on. I have the DS version. The Japanese DS version has both Japanese and English, which is great. And I have, but I wanted to play it in Japanese where I could really see it. I think I'm getting old. So I tried to play it on Steam and I was like, this is kind of ugly still. Like it's too sharp, the raw pixels. I ended up going to my Xbox Series X, doing the retail mode of RetroArch and playing the Super Famicom version on my Xbox. Because I was like, this is just like the best balance. And I've already bought this game like 5 times. So
that's cool.
And if they wanted to put it on Xbox as a simple Japanese ROM, I would pay them for that again. It's fine. I'm happy to support it, but like I needed to be able to see it. I had to figure out what the best balance was. That was the best one for me.
Nice. Yeah. That's the other big debate, right? Is the raw pixels versus what it would look like on a CRT.
Yeah, that's all they have to do is throw in a little scanline filter. You could throw in a bilinear option.
Occasionally a little line scrolls up the screen.
yeah.
And then, I hit my TV or whatever. Like, it's cool.
Bring back the old times.
It's like the pinball. It's like tilt on a pinball machine. You just like.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, we're I think we only have one final question before we're out of here. I was just wondering, why are there no Simpsons and He-Man conventions in Japan, but America has countless anime conventions? Because the reason I ask this is because it seems like Japan's
a fair response.
I know it's fair. I just want to see what people will say, but it seems like Japan, for the American otaku, it like really fills a hole in our hearts. You know what I mean? Like we have this Japan-sized hole that we have, and Japan fills it obviously. But it doesn't. I don't know. It seems like it's just not the same. This doesn't seem like there's hardly any market for American comics. I guess Dead by Daylight now. Again, gap is narrowing, but it just seems like the nerd community, otaku community in Japan doesn't have this like American counterpart too much. Maybe some Netflix shows now, I don't know, but like they're still mainly watching Japanese anime, I assume, even in 2022. They're not watching a whole lot of like BoJack Horseman or something like that in Japan. So this is just kind of a phenomenon I find interesting. Things aren't exactly equal here.
Yeah.
And I was wondering your thoughts on this.
That's a really interesting question. But yeah, my answer is almost like,
who knows? All right.
I feel like maybe they're too absorbed with their own content. I don't know. Like
it seems like that, but I mean,
too good. But
yeah, that's the thing too, right? Yeah.
I think we might see a shift because more stuff is being brought into Japanese now than it was before with things like Netflix. But I think the reason, so like a lot of the anime conventions and stuff we go to or we went to when we were younger, it wasn't necessarily born out of a sense of nostalgia, but we were going to see more of content. I'm not sure how to phrase this. Like we had access to it. It was something that had been that we had experienced and we wanted more. But there's a lot of American shows just never penetrate Japanese audiences. A lot of live action stuff does these days. Like I mean, I used to rent and watch, the Nathan Fillion show Castle from my local Tsutaya, and
Oh, wow.
you know they had the DVDs for that. Yeah, nothing like bringing a date over and be like, "Hey, I'll make you some spaghetti and let's watch this American rom-com." But I think with animation as a whole, there's not a culture around American animation the same way that there's a culture around anime and Japanese animation.
It goes back to a question or two before. Like Japan's been just so successful with exporting their culture, and America has too in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously Disney. Everybody knows that Disney is a huge cultural phenomenon in Japan. I mean, every country, I guess. But
Oh yeah,
I mean, it's just seemingly outside of Disney, not a whole lot. I mean, I assume Marvel movies have made some sort of a impact in Japan, but I still suspect it's not as big as as it has in other countries. I don't know.
I'm curious. Yeah, I am curious because Marvel movies have made a dent here, and you can buy a lot of Marvel comics and DC comics translated into Japanese.
Okay.
I had a friend that was one of his big gigs was he did a lot of the Batman comics and stuff like that
Cool.
for DC into Japanese, and so they are in comic stores. But if you imagine walking into a comic store, like walking into a Barnes and Noble back in the early aughts, and you remember what the comic section used to look like in a bookstore, where you just had like one section, like it was one set of shelves, and everything was just kind of thrown together. That's kind of what the English to Japanese comic section looks like in a Japanese comic book store. So you're walking through just waves of Japanese comics, and then there's like this one thrown together shelf of DC and Marvel stuff.
Right.
But there is more and more of it. But also like, well, I don't know. Like even in the U.S., you think of like big American cartoons. What do we have conventions for in the U.S. in terms of U.S. cartoons as well?
Well, I mean, it's all kind of lumped together. I mean, actually, there in LA, there's a convention for everything. It seems like. I mean, there's one Power Con that's just He-Man. You know what I mean?
Okay.
There's Power Morphicon, which is just Power Rangers. You know, so
I don't know about this stuff. Like
so there's
Power Rangers
anime.
American?
Power Rangers is not. That's the other thing. So I mean, it's it's based on it's based on Super Sentai. So it's definitely a Japanese influence there. But and there's Anime Expo, which is a huge thing in LA. Yeah. And when I just see that and like your general like manga anime American otaku person in America, it just seems like that American like the reverse of that doesn't exist in Japan. I don't think too much. Like this is a very particular thing here.
I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, like there probably is a Simpsons convention somewhere, so I'm not going to say that that's not a thing. But
I don't know.
But the degree to which things like Simpsons, South Park, Family Guy, like long running English language cartoons have been translated into Japanese is very small. Like a lot of stuff hasn't made it over. Like I remember watching the Simpsons movie with a group of Japanese friends.
Oh wow!
And they all kind of knew some Simpsons stuff. Like they were aware of who the characters were, but they didn't really, like "Eat My Shorts" was not common vernacular or anything like that.
Oh yeah.
And we enjoyed the movie, and the Simpsons movie had really good Japanese subtitles, or at least from what I remember of them, they were good. But so I watch a lot of Netflix with just the Japanese subtitles on because I'm used to having someone else around who doesn't speak English, and so I just always have them on. Occasionally I glance over and I look, and there is a certain amount of with a lot of American cartoons which are just joke. A lot of the humor gets cut out for the sake of having lines that forward the plot. Like Rick and Morty hits different in Japanese.
Oh wow! Okay, I haven't even thought about that.
Which is funny because they actually did a couple Rick and Morty cartoons that were directed by a famous anime director, which are free to watch on YouTube. and they have great Japanese subtitles, but because they were written in Japanese first, I think.
So it sounds like this may be a localization issue.
Yeah, like I did want, I wanted to bring that particular aspect up, just because this is the gaming Gaiden podcast. But
so
I think that's part of it. I don't think that's the whole of it. I think like Matt Alt, for example, would probably have a much more developed answer for why.
We asked him.
So yeah, I'm curious why he thinks, because I think there is a difference in the media itself. I don't think it's necessarily cultural. Like He-Man, I get, but like He-Man didn't have the distribution here that it had in the U.S.
These are just the Simpsons and He-Man was just an example of American stuff. It could be almost anything outside of Disney. I just thought of like super American things I could put into the question. It's just kind of a still to this day kind of a stark difference between, I guess I'm asking about subcultures, like the otaku subculture, and then, there's no nado, there's no nerd American, I like American nerd stuff subculture, but there's American otaku, you know what I mean? Like it's just that difference I find interesting for some reason.
There is stuff around like music and movies though, right? Like you have Western themed bars, which are not, I don't mean Western, because I apologize to anyone who is bothered by that concept of grouping Europe and America and Canada together as like Western, but force a bad habit. But what I mean by Western in this case is I mean the Duke and spaghetti westerns and the good and the bad and the ugly. I mean bars where Japanese guys walk in cowboy boots.
That's true.
Stitch shirts and cowboy hats. So you do have it for certain things, and American and Europe and British music had a high level of distribution in Japan as well. So you do see a certain amount of recognition and bars, especially like bars themed around like 1990s, 1980s, 1970s music of a certain genre.
Okay.
But you're right, not in animation, or at least to my knowledge, because I've been in Japan 13 years, but I could probably be here another 20, and there's still a million subcultures I would not have the pleasure of coming across.
That's true.
I mean, I didn't even know there was a He-Man convention. It's a regional thing within America too. Like, I don't know. I've never seen that.
There's a ton of different kinds, but I don't know. I mean, also like a lot of American cartoons are mostly comedy based, like Simpsons or whatever, Rick and Morty, and humor, I guess, is the hardest to translate. Everything's so cultural, and you make references and just this general sense of humor as well. Like Japanese people always talk about like they always say Simpsons has dark humor. I've heard that a lot there, and I'm like, I don't think it's that dark, is it? It's like barely PG-13, but that's what they've told. I've heard this from so many people. But I guess it's dark in some way, or maybe that's how the translation was when they've seen it. I don't know.
I think of like early Simpsons.
Yeah,
like there's definitely some people die occasionally and just but and I wonder, there's also that thing where however something's introduced can just become mimetic in how people perceive it. So I wonder if like an early like TV news report on NHK or something talked about The Simpsons and how dark cartoon humor from the US was coming into Japan, and that would be enough just to set the fires burning.
That's true.
And that could carry on for in perpetuity. Like, there's still a lot of negative connotations and assumptions about anime and manga that still persist in the US today, even though they're largely not true. It's just,
dude, if I hear one more person talk about panty vending machines, I'm gonna kill myself. Like,
I have
just so annoying. Like, I hate that became everybody's image of Japan.
Why
Yeah.
why that?
Yeah, why that?
Even when it existed, it was obscure. Like, it existed for a brief period in time. It's now illegal within Tokyo.
Is it? I did not know that.
I'm 90% sure they made that illegal for health reasons.
There's a old stereotype, or I wouldn't say stereotype, but like our parents' generation and before, they just look on like Asian sexuality with a certain lens. Like they're more sexual, or they've got fetishes or something like that. You know what I mean? There's some bent there. And I think that finds its, and the tentacle anime thing didn't help either, but like that plus the panty vending machine, like people just really key into that stuff when it's just less than 1% of the culture, it's kills me.
It's a common online complaint. I'm sure you see on Twitter and stuff like that as well with anybody in Japan. Like I always think of The Guardian, because The Guardian does a lot of articles like that, where it's the weird Japan story.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
it's
man,
like,
great.
And sometimes, there was some weird one that was like licking eyeballs or something.
Yeah, I remember that a few years back.
And I was like, nobody. No, like, this is a trend among Japanese teens or something. Like, nobody. Like,
yeah.
Maybe like 3 people in their weird backyard, and it was
exactly.
I think like Colbert made a joke about it on Late Night or something too. And you just that's how far this has gotten. This like, it's just so. When you talk about our parents' generation, I think it was something similar, because you have like the Kama Sutra or something, when all of East Asia is essentially the same country to people, and you have this like book of legendary sex techniques.
That like could be part of it, and plus like not having that cultural Christian like puritanical background where sex is a sin or whatever. If that's really not a part of the fabric of the core of your culture, then anybody from the Puritan side that sees a non-Puritan side, there's going to be that bent in how they look at it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's probably something's all there. This is all touching the same thing, I think.
I think people forget how weird we are as well. Just,
yeah.
Like, never forget, man.
Just like. Yeah, Americans pretty weird. Like,
so, Katch, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And
it was a good time. Really nice. It's really nice talking to you guys as well. Thank you for having me on. Hopefully, I didn't say anything that'll land me in too much hot water.
No, I don't think so. I think we were good. Yeah, man. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. That's why we started a podcast about it.
Yeah.
And it was great talking to you. And hopefully we can even hang out in Japan at some point.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that's it, man. We'll see you later.
Yep. Right. Thanks.
Well, thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Music.
And if you really liked us, please become a member at our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingguide. We have tiers, everybody. We only have 2 tiers right now. The first tier is our $1 tier. That's our tip jar tier. And basically, this gives you a shout out on our social media, mainly on our Instagram. And you'll get up on our board of shout outs. And we will thank you for supporting the show at the $1 tier. And then also we have our $5 tier, which is a whole other show. This is an interview series here, 10 episodes. And then our Patreon is going to be not interviews, but Mike and I talking about different gaming topics, or talking about stuff about Japan and gaming and things like that, and translation, whatever capacity that we can talk about it. And yeah, some of this money will even go towards our retro gaming habit, which include
I I'd really like to get my hands on a Mister at some point. A little nice FPGA device. I do have a lot of original hardware, but I sure would love to simplify with a Mister.
Yeah, and I will use whatever money that we get from this, if we reach a certain goal at least, to get a Neo Geo CDZ. So yeah, Gaming Gaiden will, you know, some of the funding at least will go towards supporting our retro gaming habits. So there that is. Game. Retro gaming, there it is. So yes, thank you for joining us, everybody, and I guess that's it. Thank you again, Matt Katch. Awesome episode. We'll catch you later.
Bye.